The sound of Marcus's laughter still echoes in my ears as I write this. He actually threw his head back and laughed when he signed those divorce papers, his pen scratching across his signature line with theatrical flourish. Finally, he said, sliding the documents back across our kitchen table with a satisfied grin, freedom at last. I sat there in stunned silence, watching my husband of 8 years celebrate the legal dissolution of our marriage like he just won the lottery. The man I'd supported through law school, nursed through his father's death, and stood by through 3 failed business ventures was practically giddy with relief to be rid of me. You know, Sarah, he continued, loosening his tie like he just finished the most satisfying day at work. I should have done this years ago. Mother always said you were holding me back from my potential. His mother, Eleanor Whitman Cross, the woman who'd made my life a living hell for 8 years with her passive-aggressive comments, her constant comparisons to Marcus's ex-fiancé, and her unwavering belief that her precious son had married beneath his station. Even now, 6 months after her funeral, she was still influencing his decisions from beyond the grave. I'm sure she would be thrilled, I replied quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. The irony of his words wasn't lost on me, but Marcus was too caught up in his celebration to notice the edge in my tone. He stood up from the table, straightening his shoulders like a weight had been lifted from them. I've already talked to Harrison and associates about that senior partner position. Without all this domestic drama holding me down, I can finally focus on what really matters, my career. The domestic drama he was referring to included my miscarriage last year, my mother's battle with cancer, and my struggle to keep our household running while he worked 16-hour days trying to impress partners who barely knew his name. Apparently, supporting your spouse through life's challenges qualified as holding someone back in Marcus's world. The house is yours, obviously, he said, gesturing around our modest 2-bedroom ranch like he was bestowing a great gift. I'll be moving into that downtown loft I showed you, much more suitable for a bachelor lifestyle. The loft he'd shown me cost $4,000 to $100 a month, nearly double our current mortgage. When I'd asked how he planned to afford it on his associate's salary, he'd winked and said his mother had left him well taken care of. I'd assumed he meant the family trust fund, or perhaps some savings bonds. Looking back, I realized how little I actually knew about Eleanor's financial affairs. What about your mother's estate? I asked, genuine curiosity getting the better of me. Has everything been settled with the lawyers? His smile faltered for just a moment. So quickly I almost missed it, still working through some paperwork. You know how these things go, lots of red tape and legal nonsense. But Pemberton assured me it's just a formality. Pemberton and Associates had been the Whitman Cross family lawyers for 3 generations. Eleanor used to brag about their discretion and thoroughness whenever she wanted to remind me that her family had the kind of wealth that required professional management. I'd met old Henry Pemberton once at Eleanor's funeral, a distinguished gentleman in his 70s who'd spoken to me with surprising warmth, considering my mother-in-law's obvious disdain for our marriage. I'm having dinner with him next week to finalize everything, Marcus continued, his confidence returning. Apparently, Mother left some specific instructions about how she wanted things handled. Very organized woman. As you know, organized was one way to put it. Eleanor Whitman Cross had been the type of person who labeled her spice rack alphabetically and kept detailed records of every family expense dating back to 1987. Her personal filing system could have put the IRS to shame, and she never left anything to chance. Well, I said, standing up to clear the divorce papers from our table, I hope everything works out the way she intended. Marcus grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door, pausing only to give me what I suppose was meant to be a sympathetic look. You'll be fine, Sarah. You're tougher than you think, and who knows, maybe this will be good for both of us in the long run. After he left, I sat alone in our kitchen, staring at my copy of the divorce decree. The house felt different already, quieter, but also somehow larger, like it was exhaling for the first time in years. I'd been dreading this moment for months, ever since Marcus first suggested we take a break from our marriage. Now that it was done, I felt something unexpected, relief. The phone rang around 9 o'clock, interrupting my solitary dinner of leftover takeout and red wine. I almost didn't answer. I wasn't ready for condolences or questions from well-meaning friends who'd watched our marriage deteriorate over the past year. But the caller ID showed a number I recognized, Pemberton and Associates, Mrs. Cross. The voice was elderly but strong, with the kind of crisp diction that comes from decades of legal training. This is Henry Pemberton. I apologize for calling so late, but I have some rather urgent matters to discuss with you regarding Eleanor Whitman Cross's estate. I set down my wine glass, confused. I think there might be some mistake, Mr. Pemberton. Marcus is handling everything related to his mother's estate. He mentioned having dinner with you next week. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Cross, I'm afraid there's been a significant misunderstanding. Could you possibly come to my office tomorrow morning? There are some documents you need to see, and I believe it would be better to discuss this matter in person." "Documents?" I glanced at the divorce papers still sitting on my kitchen counter. "Mr. Pemberton, Marcus and I signed our divorce papers today. I'm not sure I have any legal standing to Mrs. Cross," he interrupted gently. "You are the primary beneficiary of Eleanor Whitman Cross's will. Your divorce doesn't change that fact. In fact, it may make things considerably more complicated for everyone involved." The wine glass slipped from my hand, shattering against the kitchen floor as his words sank in. Primary beneficiary. Eleanor had left everything to me, the woman she'd spent 8 years treating like an unwelcome intruder in her son's life. "That's impossible," I whispered. "She hated me." Mr. Pemberton's chuckle was dry but not unkind. "Mrs. Cross, I've been practicing law for 47 years, and I've learned that what people say and what they do are often very different things. Eleanor Whitman Cross was a complex woman with very specific ideas about family, loyalty, and worthiness. I think you'll find her final wishes quite illuminating." As I hung up the phone, I realized that Marcus's laughter earlier that evening had been premature. He'd celebrated his freedom from a marriage he thought was holding him back, never suspecting that his mother, the woman whose approval he'd spent his entire life chasing, had chosen his discarded wife as her heir. The broken glass on my kitchen floor sparkled in the overhead light like scattered diamonds, and I couldn't help but smile. Tomorrow would bring answers to questions I didn't even know I should be asking. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt like the universe might actually be on my side. Pemberton and Associates occupied a corner building in downtown Portland, its red brick facade and brass nameplate exuding the kind of old money respectability that Eleanor had always valued. I arrived 15 minutes early, partly from nervousness, and partly because I'd barely slept after Mr. Pemberton's call. The receptionist, a woman in her 60s with perfectly coiffed silver hair, greeted me with surprising warmth. "You must be Mrs. Cross. Mr. Pemberton is expecting you," he's asked, "that you not be disturbed during your meeting." The mahogany-paneled office smelled of leather and old books, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal volumes and family photographs spanning several decades. Mr. Pemberton rose from behind an enormous desk, extending a weathered hand in greeting. "Mrs. Cross, thank you for coming on such short notice. Please have a seat." He gestured to a leather chair facing his desk, then settled back into his own chair with the careful movements of a man who'd been practicing law since before I was born. "I have to admit, Mr. Pemberton, I'm completely confused about why I'm here. Eleanor and I, well, we didn't have the warmest relationship." His eyes pale blue behind wire-rimmed glasses studied me with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people's character. "Mrs. Cross, I represented Eleanor Whitman Cross for over 30 years. I drafted her first will when she was a young widow, revised it twice during Marcus's childhood, and created the final version just 18 months ago. 18 months ago? That would have been right after my miscarriage. During one of the most difficult periods of my marriage, Eleanor had been particularly cold during that time, making pointed comments about my inability to give her grandchildren and suggesting that perhaps Marcus deserves someone more fertile. The timing is significant," Mr. Pemberton continued, opening a thick manila folder. "Eleanor came to me in March of last year, quite agitated about something. She insisted on completely rewriting her will, despite my advice that her previous version was perfectly adequate." He pulled out a document bound in blue legal backing, its pages thick with typed text and official seals. "This is Eleanor's final will and testament, executed on March 15th of last year. She was very specific about keeping its contents confidential until after her death. With one exception, she wanted Marcus to believe he was her primary beneficiary." The room seemed to tilt slightly as I processed his words. She intentionally misled him. "Mrs. Cross, Eleanor Whitman Cross was one of the most calculating people I've ever encountered. Every decision she made was strategic, designed to achieve a specific outcome. She spent months planning this will, considering every possible scenario." He opened the document to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. "I'll read you the relevant section. To my daughter-in-law, Sarah Elizabeth Cross, I leave the entirety of my estate, including but not limited to the family residence at 847 Elm Street, valued at approximately $2.8 million, my investment portfolio, managed by Goldman Sachs, valued at approximately $4.2 million, my collection of rare books and artwork, valued at approximately $1.1 million, and all other assets, properties, and holdings in my name." The numbers hit me like physical blows. $2.8 million, $4.2 million, $1.1 million. I'd known Eleanor was wealthy, But I'd never imagined the true scope of her fortune. Marcus had always been vague about his family's finances, mentioning trust funds and investments but never specific amounts. "There's more," Mr. Pemberton continued. "She also left detailed instructions about how the inheritance should be managed, and under what circumstances it could be revoked." Revoked, my voice came out as a whisper. Eleanor was very concerned about gold diggers and fortune hunters. She included specific provisions stating that if you were married within 5 years, or attempted to share the inheritance with Marcus, everything would go to various charities instead. The implications began to crystallize in my mind. Eleanor hadn't just left me her fortune, she'd structured it as a test, a challenge, perhaps even a trap. She'd known about our marital problems, had probably encouraged Marcus's growing dissatisfaction with our marriage, all while secretly planning to leave everything to the daughter-in-law she'd openly despised. "Why?" I asked, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the arms of the leather chair. "Why would she do this?" Mr. Pemberton leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Cross, I spent considerable time with Eleanor over the years. She was a woman who valued strength, loyalty, and integrity above all else. She watched you support Marcus through law school while working 2 jobs. She saw you care for your mother during her cancer treatment while maintaining your marriage. She observed your grace under pressure, even when that pressure came from her. But she was horrible to me. She criticized everything I did, compared me to Marcus's ex-fiancé, made it clear she thought he'd married beneath his station. Eleanor believed that adversity revealed character. She spent 8 years testing you, pushing you, observing how you responded to criticism and hardship. In her mind, she was evaluating whether you were worthy of her family's legacy." He pulled out another document, this one handwritten on Eleanor's personal stationery. "She left this letter to be given to you along with the will. I think it might provide some additional clarity." The envelope was addressed to me in Eleanor's precise handwriting. Inside, 3 pages of cream-colored stationery contained what appeared to be the most honest communication my mother-in-law had ever attempted. "My dear Sarah," it began, "if you are reading this, then my final test has been completed, and you have proven yourself worthy of what I am entrusting to you. I know you believe I disliked you, and I allow that belief to persist because it served my purpose. The truth is far more complicated. I have watched you for 8 years, Sarah. I have seen you work multiple jobs to support my son's education. While he took your sacrifices for granted, I have witnessed your patience with his failures, your loyalty during his struggles, and your grace under the pressure I deliberately applied. You have shown strength where he has shown weakness, integrity where he has shown selfishness. Marcus is my son, and I love him, but he is fundamentally flawed in ways that money and privilege have only magnified. He expects the world to accommodate his desires, without earning that accommodation. He takes credit for successes and blames others for failures. Most importantly, he cannot recognize the value of what he has until he has lost it. By the time you read this, I suspect your marriage will be over. Marcus will have convinced himself that you are holding him back from greatness, and he will have celebrated his freedom from the one person who truly supported him. This is exactly what I expected, and it is why my fortune now belongs to you, instead of him. Use this inheritance wisely, Sarah. Build the life you deserve. Pursue the dreams you sacrifice for others, and never again settle for being undervalued by those who should treasure you. And remember, should you choose to reconcile with Marcus, should you attempt to share this inheritance with him, everything will be donated to charity instead. This is not cruelty. It is the final lesson in a curriculum of character that began the day you joined our family. You have passed every test I set before you. Now it is time to claim your reward." I set the letter down with shaking hands, my mind reeling from the revelation that my years of suffering under Eleanor's criticism had been an elaborate evaluation process. The woman I thought hated me had been secretly preparing to make me one of the wealthiest women in Oregon. "There's one more thing," Mr. Pemberton said quietly. "Eleanor instructed me to wait exactly 1 week after your divorce was finalized before contacting you. She wanted to be certain that Marcus had made his choice freely, without knowledge of what he was giving up." I thought about Marcus's laughter the night before, his relief at being rid of the wife he thought was dragging him down. He'd celebrated his freedom while unknowingly walking away from $8.1 million, and a woman who'd loved him despite his flaws. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now, Mrs. Cross, you become one of the wealthiest women in the Pacific Northwest. I'll need you to sign some paperwork, but as of this moment, everything Eleanor owned is yours. Her house, her investments, her art collection, all of it." As I signed document after document, transferring millions of dollars into my name, I couldn't stop thinking about the phone call Marcus would receive when Mr. Pemberton informed him that his mother's estate had been settled, just not in the way he'd expected. The woman he'd laughed at while signing divorce papers was now worth more than he'd ever dreamed of earning in his entire legal career. And thanks to Eleanor's carefully crafted conditions, there was nothing he could do about it except live with the consequences of his choices. Justice, I realized, sometimes came in forms we never expected. 3 days after my meeting with Mr. Pemberton, I was sitting in Eleanor's now my mansion on Elm Street, still struggling to believe this was real. The house was everything I'd imagined when Eleanor used to describe her family estate with such pride. 12 rooms spread across 8,000 square feet of Victorian elegance, with original hardwood floors, hand-carved moldings, and windows that looked out over manicured gardens. I'd moved in the day before, bringing only a suitcase and my laptop. Everything else felt too small, too ordinary for these grand spaces. The master bedroom alone was larger than the living room of the house Marcus and I had shared, with a walk-in closet that could have doubled as a studio apartment. I was in Eleanor's, my study, surrounded by first-edition books and oil paintings worth more than most people's houses, when my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and my heart jumped despite everything that had happened between us. Sarah? His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear something underneath: confusion. Maybe even a hint of panic. I need to ask you about something. What's wrong? Old habits die hard, and my first instinct was still to worry about his well-being, even after everything. I just got off the phone with Pemberton. There was a long pause, and I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. He said there were some complications with Mother's estate, something about primary beneficiaries and legal documents. I closed my eyes, knowing what was coming. What did he tell you exactly? He said I needed to speak with you before he could provide any additional information. Sarah, what the hell is going on? You were married to me, not her. You have nothing to do with Mother's estate. The bitterness in his voice was so familiar. The same tone he'd use whenever he felt the world wasn't arranging itself according to his expectations. For 8 years, I tried to soothe that anger, to make myself smaller so he could feel bigger. Now, sitting in what had become my library, surrounded by wealth beyond his comprehension, I felt something shift inside me. Marcus, where are you? Right now. I'm at the office. Sarah, you're scaring me. What aren't you telling me? You might want to sit down. I heard the squeak of his desk chair, the same sound that used to background our late-night phone calls when he was working overtime at the firm. Okay, I'm sitting. What's this about? Your mother left everything to me. The silence that followed was so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. Then I heard a sound that might have been laughter or crying, a harsh, disbelieving bark. That echoed through the phone. That's not possible, you're lying. I'm sitting in her study right now. Marcus, the house, the investments, the art collection, all of it, $8.1 million total. The sharp intake of breath was audible even through the phone. 8.1. Sarah, that's not possible. She would never. You hated each other. I thought we did too, apparently. She had different feelings about our relationship. This is insane. His voice was rising, taking on the shrill quality it acquired when he felt cornered. She's my mother. I'm her only child. There has to be some mistake, some legal error. There's no mistake. Mr. Pemberton showed me the will. She revised it 18 months ago, specifically to leave everything to me. 18 months ago? That was right after he trailed off, and I knew he was remembering the same timeline I had: the miscarriage, the strain on our marriage, his mother's increased criticism of me during that period. Right after I lost the baby, I finished quietly, apparently. That was when she decided I deserved her inheritance more than you did. This can't be legal. I'll contest it. I'll hire the best probate lawyers in the state. She was obviously not in her right mind. The desperation in his voice was almost pitiful. But I found I had no sympathy left for him. Marcus, your mother was sharper than both of us combined, right up until the day she died. You know that. She planned this carefully. Why? The word came out as a broken whisper. Why would she do this to me? I thought about Eleanor's letter, about the 8 years of tests I'd unknowingly endured, about Marcus's celebration when he signed her divorce papers just days ago. She left me a letter explaining her reasoning. Would you like to know what she said? Yes. His voice was barely audible. I opened the letter, reading directly from Eleanor's careful handwriting. I have watched you for 8 years, Sarah. I have seen you work multiple jobs to support my son's education. While he took your sacrifices for granted, I have witnessed your patience with his failures, your loyalty during his struggles, and your grace under the pressure I deliberately applied. She said that? About me taking you for granted. There's more. Marcus is my son, and I love him. But he is fundamentally flawed in ways that money and privilege have only magnified. He expects the world to accommodate his desires without earning that accommodation. He takes credit for successes and blames others for failures. Most importantly, he cannot recognize the value of what he has. Until he has lost it, the silence stretched so long I wondered if he hung up. Then I heard something that broke my heart despite everything, the sound of my ex-husband crying. She really thought that little of me. She loved you, Marcus. But she saw your flaws clearly. And she didn't trust you with the family fortune. She trusted me instead. But you're not even family anymore. We're divorced. That doesn't change her will. She anticipated that possibility, in fact. I think she was counting on it. What do you mean? I read him another section of the letter. By the time you read this, I suspect your marriage will be over. Marcus will have convinced himself that you are holding him back from greatness. And he will have celebrated his freedom from the one person who truly supported him. His sharp intake of breath told me Eleanor's assessment had hit home. She knew I would divorce you. She predicted it, and Marcus, she was right, wasn't she? You did celebrate. You laughed when you signed those papers. You told me I was holding you back from your potential. Sarah, I didn't mean, yes? You did. You meant every word. And your mother knew you well enough to predict exactly how you'd react. I could hear him struggling to process this information. The reality that his mother had seen through him so completely. Is there anything I can do? Any way to challenge this? Mr. Pemberton says the will is ironclad. Eleanor worked with him for months to make sure there were no loopholes. What about us? What if we tried again? The pathetic hope in his voice almost made me feel sorry for him, almost. Even if I wanted to, which I don't. Eleanor included provisions preventing that. If I remarry you or share any of the inheritance with you, everything goes to charity instead. She thought of everything. His voice was hollow, defeated. She did. She knew exactly what kind of man you are, Marcus, and she knew exactly what kind of woman I am. That's why she chose me. So that's it, 8 years of marriage. And I walk away with nothing while you get millions? You walked away with exactly what you wanted, freedom from a wife you thought was holding you back. The fact that you also walked away from $8 million is just irony. I heard him slam something, probably his fist against his desk. This is insane. This is cruel. Is it? You celebrated getting rid of me just 3 days ago. You were thrilled to be free of our marriage. The only thing that's changed is you now know what that freedom cost you. I made a mistake, Sarah. I can see that now. The mistake was made a long time ago, Marcus. And it wasn't signing the divorce papers, it was never appreciating what you had while you had it. So what happens now? I looked around Eleanor's study, at the life she carefully constructed and then gifted to me. Now I live the life your mother thought I deserved. And you live with the consequences of your choices. Sarah, please, we can work something out. No. Marcus, we can't. Your mother made sure of that. I hung up, my hands trembling slightly as I set the phone down on Eleanor's mahogany desk. Through the tall windows, I could see the garden she'd tended so carefully, the roses she loved, the fountain that had provided the soundtrack to so many family gatherings I'd felt excluded from. Now it was all mine, the house, the gardens, the fortune, the power. Everything Eleanor had built over a lifetime was now in my hands. And Marcus, who laughed at the idea of being married to me just days ago, was sitting in his office, realizing that his mother's love had come with conditions he'd never managed to meet. The phone rang again, Marcus calling back, but I didn't answer. He'd had 8 years to appreciate what he had. Now it was time for him to learn what it felt like to lose everything he'd never valued in the first place. The headlines appeared in the Portland Business Journal 2 weeks after my conversation with Marcus. Whitman Cross fortune passes to daughter-in-law in stunning estate decision. The article, which somehow obtained details about Eleanor's will, despite Mr. Pemberton's usual discretion, painted a picture of a scorned mother-in-law choosing her son's ex-wife over her own blood. I was reading the article over coffee, in my new morning room, a sun-filled space overlooking the rose garden that Eleanor had meticulously maintained, when my phone began ringing incessantly. Reporters, social media influencers, distant relatives I'd never met, and several charities hoping to benefit from my sudden windfall, all wanted to speak with the woman who'd inherited millions from a mother-in-law who'd supposedly despised her. But it was a call from Marcus's law firm that caught my attention. Not Marcus himself, he hadn't contacted me since our devastating phone conversation, but from Harrison and Associates managing partner, Richard Harrison himself, Mrs. Cross. His voice carried the kind of authority that comes from 40 years of handling high-profile cases. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I need to discuss a rather delicate matter concerning Marcus. I'm listening. As you may know, Marcus has been pursuing a senior associate position with our firm. He's quite talented, and we've been seriously considering promoting him. However, this recent development with his family's estate has created some unexpected complications. I set down my coffee cup, intrigued despite myself. What kind of complications? Well, Marcus led us to believe that he would soon be benefiting from a substantial inheritance. In fact, He used those future assets as collateral for several rather significant financial commitments: the downtown loft you may have heard about, a new car, some expensive business development activities. The pieces began clicking into place. Marcus hadn't just assumed he'd inherit Eleanor's fortune, he borrowed against it. How significant are these commitments, Mr. Harrison? Between the apartment lease, the vehicle loan, and various other expenses, Marcus has obligated himself to approximately $12,000 in monthly payments on his current salary of $6,800 per month. This creates what we might call a sustainability issue. I almost laughed. Marcus had been so confident of his inheritance that he already spent money he didn't have. And you're calling me because Mrs. Cross. Marcus approached me yesterday asking for an emergency advance against his future earnings. When I explained that our firm doesn't operate that way, he became agitated. He suggested that as his ex-wife, you might be willing to help him resolve his financial difficulties. He asked you to call me? Not exactly. He mentioned that you'd recently come into some money and might be feeling generous toward him, given your shared history. I took the liberty of researching the situation, which is how I learned about the inheritance. The audacity was breathtaking. Marcus had celebrated divorcing me, then borrowed money against an inheritance he assumed was his, and was now indirectly asking me to bail him out of his financial crisis. Mr. Harrison, I can assure you that I will not be helping Marcus with his financial problems. He made his choices and now he needs to live with the consequences. I understand completely, Mrs. Cross, and if I may say so, that's probably wise. However, this has put our firm in a difficult position regarding Marcus's future here. How so? A lawyer with serious financial instability can be a liability for the firm, creditors, desperate measures, ethical compromises. We've seen it before. Unless Marcus can resolve his situation quickly, we may need to reconsider his employment altogether. After ending the call, I realized that Marcus's problems were multiplying beyond just losing the inheritance. He constructed a life he couldn't afford based on money that was never his, and now that foundation was crumbling beneath him. My next call came from someone unexpected: Vivian Ashworth, Eleanor's closest friend and the unofficial social coordinator of Portland's old money community. I'd met her several times at Eleanor's dinner parties, where she'd always treated me with the same polite coolness as my mother-in-law, Sarah, dear. Her cultured voice carried a warmth I'd never heard before. I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted to express my admiration for what Eleanor did. It was brilliantly executed. I'm sorry. Oh, please don't pretend surprise with me. Eleanor and I discussed her plans extensively. She was quite pleased with how everything turned out. This was news to me. She talked to you about the will. My dear girl, Eleanor talked to me about everything. She was particularly interested in my opinion of you over the years. I told her repeatedly that you were far too good for Marcus, and she agreed completely. I sank into Eleanor's my favorite reading chair, trying to process this revelation. You supported her decision to leave everything to me. Supported it. I encouraged it. That boy needed to learn that actions have consequences, and Eleanor needed to ensure her fortune went to someone who would honor it properly. Vivian, can I ask you something? Did Eleanor really dislike me? Or was all of that criticism just performance? Her laugh was musical. Genuinely amused. Oh, sweetie. Eleanor adored you from the moment Marcus brought you home. She told me you were the first woman he'd ever dated who didn't immediately start calculating how to spend his family's money. But she was so cold to me, so critical. Eleanor believed that character was revealed through adversity. She needed to know if you would remain gracious under pressure, if you would support Marcus even when his family seemed unsupportive of you. You passed every test she devised. It felt like torture at the time. I'm sure it did. But now look where you are, sitting in one of Portland's finest homes, worth more than most people can imagine, and completely free to live life on your own terms. Eleanor always said the best revenge was living well. Is that what this is? Revenge against Marcus, perhaps. But more than that, it's recognition of your worth. Eleanor saw qualities in you that even you didn't recognize. She wanted to give you the power to become the woman she knew you could be. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Marcus stood on my front porch, the porch that had once belonged to his family, looking haggard and desperate. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his eyes carried the hollow look of a man who'd realized too late what he lost. Sarah, please, I just need 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He stood in the grand foyer, staring up at the crystal chandelier his great-grandmother had imported from France, and I saw him truly comprehend for the first time that all of this, everything he'd grown up expecting to inherit, now belonged to the woman he discarded. It's not fair, he said quietly. She was my mother, and I was your wife. You were holding me back. No, Marcus, I was holding you up, there's a difference. He turned to face me, and I saw tears in his eyes. I'm going to lose my job. The apartment, the car, everything I borrowed against money I thought was coming to me. I know. Mr. Harrison called, you could help me, just a loan, just enough to get me back on my feet. I thought about Eleanor's letter, about the specific warnings against sharing the inheritance with Marcus. Even if I wanted to, which I don't, your mother made sure I can't. If I give you money, everything goes to charity instead. She really did think of everything, didn't she? She knew exactly who you are, Marcus. And she knew exactly who I am. He walked to the window, looking out at the garden where he played as a child. So this is it? You get everything and I get nothing? You got what you wanted, freedom from a marriage you thought was holding you back. The fact that it cost you $8 million doesn't change the fact that you chose to leave. I made a mistake. You made a choice, and choices have consequences. As I watched him walk back to his car, a $70,000 BMW he could no longer afford, I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. Not enough to help him, not enough to forgive him, but enough to recognize that he was finally learning the difference between what he wanted and what he'd actually needed. Eleanor had orchestrated this perfectly, right down to the timing. Marcus's laughter when he signed her divorce papers had sealed his fate, just as she'd predicted. Now he would spend the rest of his life knowing that he'd walked away from the greatest fortune in Oregon because he couldn't appreciate the woman who'd loved him despite his flaws, the woman who now owned everything he'd expected to inherit, and who will. News of Eleanor's inheritance decision spread through Portland's social circles like wildfire. Within a month, I found myself at the center of a phenomenon I never could have predicted. I'd become something of a folk hero among women who'd felt undervalued in their own marriages. The invitations started arriving: daily lunch requests from wives of Marcus's colleagues, coffee dates with women from Eleanor's former social circle, and dinner parties hosted by people who'd never acknowledged my existence. When I was married to Marcus, it was as if my transformation from discarded wife to millionaire heiress had rewritten the rules of social acceptability. Sarah, darling, you simply must tell me how it feels to have the last laugh, gushed Patricia Hendricks, the wife of a prominent banker, over lunch at the most exclusive restaurant in downtown Portland. Marcus always acted so superior at the firm's social events, bragging about his family's wealth. Now, everyone knows that wealth belongs to you. I'd been reluctant to accept these invitations at first, suspicious of people who'd ignored me for 8 years suddenly wanting my friendship. But I was learning that wealth didn't just buy material comfort, it bought social relevance, respect, and most importantly, the power to choose my own company. I never wanted revenge, I told Patricia. Honestly, I just wanted respect. Well, you certainly have that now. And Marcus? I heard he's had to give up that ridiculous downtown apartment and move back in with his roommate from law school at 34. Can you imagine? I could imagine, actually, the image of Marcus, who'd once bragged about his sophisticated bachelor lifestyle, sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with his old study partner, made me feel simultaneously satisfied and sad. Satisfied because he was finally experiencing consequences for his choices, and sad because this could have all been avoided if he'd simply valued what he had. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Sarah, this is Jennifer Morrison, Marcus's ex-fiancée. I know this might seem strange, but could we meet for coffee? I have some things I think you should know about Eleanor. Jennifer Morrison, the woman Eleanor had constantly compared me to during our marriage, always suggesting that Marcus had downgraded when he chose me over her. I'd spent 8 years hearing about Jennifer's accomplishments, her social connections, her suitability for the Whitman Cross family legacy. We met at a small cafe in the Pearl District, away from the restaurants, where Portland's elite typically gathered. Jennifer was exactly as I'd imagined: tall, elegant, with the kind of refined beauty that spoke of good breeding and expensive maintenance. But what surprised me was the warmth in her eyes, the genuine friendliness that made her immediately likable. I want to start by saying how sorry I am for what Eleanor put you through, she said after we'd ordered our drinks. I know she used me as a weapon against you for years, and that must have been incredibly hurtful. You knew she was doing that. Eleanor and I stayed in touch after Marcus and I broke up. She would call occasionally, usually to complain about whatever poor woman he was dating at the time. When he married you, those calls became more frequent and more pointed. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the old wound of never being good enough for Eleanor's standards. She really did prefer you. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Jennifer leaned forward, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. Eleanor didn't prefer me, Sarah. She used me as a measuring stick because she knew I would never be a threat to her control over Marcus. What do you mean? I broke up with Marcus because he was weak. He couldn't make decisions without his mother's approval. Couldn't stand up to her when she interfered in our relationship. Couldn't see that her guidance was actually manipulation designed to keep him dependent on her. This was not what I'd expected to hear for 8 years. I believed that Jennifer was the perfect woman I'd failed to measure up to. Eleanor knew I would never marry Marcus, as long as she was pulling his strings, but she also knew that my rejection of him would make her seem like his only ally. It was brilliant, really using me to push him toward women who would tolerate her interference. Then why did she compare me to you constantly? Because she wanted to see how you'd react. Would you become bitter and competitive? Would you try to change yourself to match an impossible standard? Or would you maintain your dignity while supporting Marcus despite his family's disapproval? The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Even Eleanor's cruelest comparisons had been tests, carefully designed to evaluate my character under pressure. Jennifer, are you saying that Eleanor wanted me to succeed all along? I'm saying that Eleanor was playing a very long game, and you were the only person she met who was strong enough to win it. We talked for 2 hours, and by the end of our conversation, I understood that Eleanor's manipulation had extended far beyond just me and Marcus. She'd orchestrated years of social dynamics, relationship tests, and character evaluations, all leading to the moment when she would decide who deserved to inherit the wealth she'd spent a lifetime accumulating. There's one more thing you should know, Jennifer said as we prepared to leave. Eleanor asked me to give you this if anything ever happened to her. She handed me a small wrapped package. She said you'd know when the time was right to open it. That evening, I sat in Eleanor's study, now turning the package over in my hands. It was small, about the size of a jewelry box, wrapped in the same cream-colored paper Eleanor had used for my birthday gifts during our marriage. Her handwriting on the attached card was unmistakable for Sarah when she finally understands inside. The box was a key, old, ornate, and clearly antique. Attached to it was a note in Eleanor's handwriting: "Third shelf behind Austen, the final lesson." I walked to the bookshelf, running my fingers along the leather spines until I found Eleanor's collection of Jane Austen novels. Behind them was a hidden compartment, and the key fit perfectly into a small lock I hadn't noticed before. The compartment contained a leather journal, its pages filled with Eleanor's precise handwriting. The first entry was dated 8 years ago, just weeks after Marcus had brought me home to meet her for the first time. "Met Sarah today. She's nothing like the women Marcus usually brings home. No calculation in her eyes, no assessment of our home's value, no subtle inquiries about family finances. She actually seemed nervous about making a good impression, which tells me her interest is in Marcus rather than his prospects. This one bears watching." Page after page documented Eleanor's observations of me over the years. My patience with Marcus's moods, my grace under her deliberate pressure, my loyalty during difficult times, my strength in supporting his dreams while pursuing my own goals. It was 8 years of secret admiration disguised as criticism. One entry, written just after my miscarriage, brought tears to my eyes. "Sarah lost the baby today. Marcus called, more concerned about missing work than comforting his wife. When I stopped by this evening, I found her cleaning the kitchen with tears streaming down her face, trying to maintain normalcy despite her grief. She apologized for not being a better hostess. This woman's strength is remarkable, and she's completely wasted on my son." The final entry, dated the day before Eleanor revised her will, contained the explanation I've been seeking. "I have spent 8 years testing Sarah, pushing her, evaluating her character under pressure. She has exceeded every expectation. She is loyal without being servile, strong without being cruel, gracious without being false. Marcus will never appreciate these qualities. He lacks the emotional intelligence to recognize genuine worth. But I do. Sarah has earned what I am about to give her, and I know she will use it wisely. This is not revenge against Marcus, it is recognition of Sarah's true value." As I closed the journal, I finally understood the full scope of Eleanor's plan. She hadn't just left me her fortune, she'd spent 8 years preparing me to deserve it. Every criticism, every comparison, every moment of social discomfort had been designed to test and strengthen my character. The phone rang, interrupting my revelation. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time since our divorce, I answered. "Sarah?" His voice was different now, humbled, desperate, completely unlike the confident man who'd laughed while signing our divorce papers. "I know I have no right to ask this, but I'm losing everything. The firm let me go today. I can't make my rent, my car payments, anything. I'm about to be homeless." "I'm sorry to hear that, Marcus. My mother's journal, did she leave you anything like that? Any explanation for why she did this?" I looked down at the leather journal in my hands, at 8 years of secret admiration and careful planning documented in Eleanor's precise handwriting. She left me several things, Marcus, but the most important one was an understanding of my own worth. Sarah, please, I know I made mistakes. I know I didn't appreciate you. But I'm begging you help me. For the first time since receiving Eleanor's inheritance, I felt truly powerful. Not because of the money, not because of the property, but because I finally understood what Eleanor had been trying to teach me all along. I had always been worthy of more than I'd accepted. Marcus, your mother spent 8 years teaching me a very important lesson. She taught me never to settle for being undervalued by people who should treasure me. I learned that lesson well. What does that mean? It means that you had your chance to treasure me, and you chose to celebrate being rid of me instead. Some opportunities don't come twice. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Eleanor's greatest gift wasn't the money, it was the knowledge that I deserved every bit of happiness and respect that was now mine. She'd given me the tools to build the life I'd always deserved, and the confidence to never again accept less than I was worth. 6 months after inheriting Eleanor's fortune, I discovered that money wasn't just a tool for buying things. It was a catalyst for becoming the person you were always meant to be. The transformation began subtly, with small decisions that gradually reshaped not just my lifestyle, but my entire sense of self-worth. My first major decision was educational. I enrolled in Portland State University's executive MBA program, using my newfound financial freedom to pursue the business degree I'd always dreamed of, but could never afford while supporting Marcus through law school. The professors treated me with the respect that substantial wealth commands, but more importantly, I found that I had a natural aptitude for strategic thinking and financial management. Mrs. Cross, Professor Williams commented after I presented my analysis of sustainable investment portfolios, "Your insights suggest you have considerable experience with wealth management. Have you worked in finance before?" "No," I replied, "but I've been watching and learning for longer than I realized." The second decision was professional. Rather than simply living off Eleanor's investments, I decided to multiply them. I hired a team of financial advisors and began strategically acquiring undervalued properties throughout Portland. The Whitman Cross name still carried weight in real estate circles, and I discovered that I had inherited not just Eleanor's money, but her reputation for shrewd business judgment. My third decision was personal. I would never again make myself small to accommodate someone else's ego. The invitation to Marcus's law school reunion arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Marcus Cross. The irony wasn't lost on me. We'd been divorced for nearly a year, but the Alumni Association's records hadn't been updated. I almost threw it away, but something made me reconsider. IRSVPD for one. The reunion was held at the Multnomah Athletic Club, Portland's most exclusive social venue. I arrived wearing a black Chanel dress that cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. At his new apartment, my hair professionally styled, and confidence that money couldn't buy but could certainly enhance. The reaction when I walked into the cocktail reception was immediate and satisfying. Conversations paused, heads turned, and I watched recognition dawn on faces that had once dismissed me as Marcus's unsuitable wife. Now I was Sarah Cross, heiress to the Whitman Cross fortune, successful businesswoman and one of Portland's most eligible women. Sarah, Rebecca Harrison, the wife of Marcus's former supervisor, practically ran across the room to greet me. "You look absolutely stunning. We heard about your incredible good fortune." "How exciting." Rebecca had never spoken to me at firm social events during my marriage, usually finding excuses to end conversations when Marcus introduced me as his wife, who worked in retail. Now she hung on every word as I described my real estate ventures and graduate studies. "And Marcus," she asked, glancing around the room, "how is he handling everything?" "I'm sure you'd have to ask him," I replied diplomatically. "We don't really stay in touch." I spotted him across the room, standing alone by the bar, nursing what appeared to be his third drink of the evening. The confident swagger that had once attracted me was gone, replaced by the hunched shoulders and darting eyes of a man who knew he was being discussed behind his back. He saw me watching and approached with obvious reluctance. "Sarah?" He looked me up and down, taking in the expensive dress, the jewelry, the unmistakable aura of success. "You look different." "I feel different. I heard about your real estate investments and the MBA program. Very impressive." "Thank you. I also heard you're seeing someone." His attempt at casual conversation couldn't hide the jealousy in his voice. I wasn't actually seeing anyone seriously, but I'd been photographed at charity events with various eligible bachelors, successful men who treated me as an equal rather than an accessory. The Portland social pages had taken notice, often mentioning my business ventures alongside my social activities. "I'm focusing on my career right now," I said truthfully. "Career?" He said the word like it tasted bitter. "You never cared about having a career when we were married." "I cared about having a partner who supported my dreams. Once I found my independence, pursuing those dreams became much easier." The truth hit him visibly. During our marriage, he'd discouraged my ambitions, worried that my success might overshadow his own achievements. Now, without his limitations holding me back, I was flourishing in ways he'd never allowed himself to imagine. Sarah, I need you to know that I realize I made a terrible mistake. The biggest mistake of my life, Marcus. You made the choice that felt right to you at the time. The consequences aren't a mistake, they're just consequences. But if we could try again, even if Eleanor's will permitted it, which it doesn't, I wouldn't be interested. I'm not the same person you divorced. He looked around the room, at our former friends and colleagues who were clearly gossiping about his dramatic fall from grace. Everyone knows, don't they? About the inheritance. About me losing everything. People talk, it's what they do. I'm a cautionary tale now. The man who threw away $8 million for his freedom. You're the man who got exactly what he wanted. You said I was holding you back from your potential. Now you're free to discover what that potential actually is. The cruelty of my words was intentional. For 8 years, I'd absorbed his criticism, his mother's disapproval, and society's judgment that I wasn't good enough for the life I was living. Now he could experience what it felt like to be found wanting. I'm thinking about leaving Portland, he said quietly. Starting over somewhere else where people don't know the story. That might be wise. Will you ever forgive me? I considered the question seriously. Forgiveness wasn't about him, it was about freeing myself from the weight of resentment. But forgiveness didn't require reconciliation or even continued contact. I forgive you for not appreciating what we had, Marcus. But I also thank you for setting me free to find something better. As I walked away from him, I felt the final pieces of our marriage dissolve completely. He was now truly my past, while my future stretched ahead full of possibilities he'd never been capable of imagining. The evening's highlight came during the dinner portion of the reunion. Dean Patterson, who had once questioned my presence at law school social events, introduced me to the crowd as one of Portland's rising business leaders and a generous supporter of our scholarship programs. The scholarship programs I'd endowed at multiple universities specifically supported women from working-class backgrounds pursuing graduate degrees. Eleanor's money was being used to lift up other women who, like me, had the intelligence and determination to succeed but lacked the financial resources to pursue their dreams. After the reunion, I drove through Portland's quiet streets in the Tesla I'd bought myself, the first car I'd ever owned that was chosen purely because I wanted it, not because it was practical or affordable. The city looked different from the driver's seat of success, brighter somehow, full of opportunities. I was finally positioned to seize. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Morrison. Saw the reunion photos online. You looked radiant, Eleanor. Would be so proud. Eleanor would be proud. The thought filled me with warmth as I pulled into the driveway of the mansion that had once intimidated me but now felt like home. I learned to appreciate its grandeur, to move through its rooms with confidence, to see it as a launching pad for the life I was building, rather than a museum of someone else's accomplishments. 6 months ago, Marcus had laughed while signing our divorce papers, certain that he was escaping a marriage that limited his potential. Tonight, he'd watched his ex-wife command the respect of Portland's legal elite while he struggled to maintain his professional reputation and financial stability. The woman he discarded had become everything Eleanor had seen in her from the beginning: strong, successful, and completely beyond his reach. And the fortune he'd expected to inherit was now funding the dreams of the woman who'd proven herself worthy of it through 8 years of unwavering character. Justice, I learned, wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about giving people exactly what they thought they wanted, then letting them live with the consequences of their choices. 1 year after my divorce became final, I received an invitation that would test everything Eleanor had taught me about strength, forgiveness, and self-worth. Marcus was getting married again. The engagement announcement appeared in the Portland Tribune Society pages, complete with a photo of Marcus and his fiancée, Amanda Sinclair, daughter of a prominent local businessman. The article mentioned Marcus's recovery from recent setbacks, and Amanda's father's offer of a position at his investment firm, a lifeline thrown to a drowning man by a father-in-law who valued connections over competence. Did you see the announcement? Vivian Ashworth asked during our monthly lunch at the Portland Art Museum. She becomes something of a mentor to me, helping me navigate the complex social waters of Portland's elite, while sharing stories about Eleanor that continued to illuminate my mother-in-law's complex character. I saw it, I replied, cutting into the salmon that had become a favorite at these lunches. He certainly didn't waste any time. 6 months. That's how long it took him to find someone willing to overlook his recent difficulties. Vivian's tone carried the subtle disdain she reserved for social climbing. She considered particularly transparent. Do you know her? Amanda, sweet girl, early 20s. fresh out of college with a degree in art history and no real understanding of the world. She sees Marcus as a sophisticated older man who's had some temporary bad luck. I felt a familiar pang, not jealousy, but something closer to pity. Another young woman was about to discover what it meant to be married to Marcus Cross, to be diminished by his needs, criticized for not meeting his standards, and eventually discarded when something better came along. Her father is quite wealthy. Vivian continued, I suspect Marcus sees this marriage as his path back to financial stability. And what does Amanda see? A handsome lawyer who makes her feel worldly and sophisticated. She has no idea she's being targeted for her father's money. The wedding invitation arrived 2 weeks later, an elegant card embossed with gold lettering. That must have cost more than Marcus could afford on his current salary. The invitation was addressed to me alone, not Mr. and Mrs. This time, and included a personal note in handwriting I didn't recognize. Dear Sarah, I know this might seem strange, but I would very much like you to attend our wedding. Marcus has told me so much about you, and I feel like we could be friends. I hope you'll consider joining us for the celebration. Warmly, Amanda. The innocence in those words broke my heart. Amanda had no idea that she was inviting the ex-wife who'd inherited the fortune. Her fiancé had expected, the woman whose success now highlighted his failures. The living reminder of everything he lost through his own arrogance. I called Jennifer Morrison for advice. We become genuine friends over the past year, bonded by our shared experience of Marcus's limitations and Eleanor's manipulations. Are you seriously considering going? Jennifer asked, her tone suggesting I might have lost my mind. I keep thinking about Amanda. She has no idea what she's walking into. Sarah, you cannot save every woman from making the mistake of marrying Marcus Cross. Some lessons have to be learned through experience. But what if I could prevent her from going through what I went through? What if you could? Do you think she'd listen? Do you think Marcus would let you anywhere near her if he suspected you might interfere with his meal ticket? Jennifer was right, of course. But Eleanor's journal has shown me something important about the power of subtle influence, and I found myself curious about Amanda Sinclair, and whether she possessed the strength to eventually see through Marcus's charm.ir SVPD. Yes, the wedding was held at the Columbia River Gorge, a stunning outdoor venue that showcased the natural beauty of the Pacific Northwest. I arrived fashionably late, wearing an understated navy dress that was elegant without being attention-grabbing. The goal wasn't to upstage the bride, but to observe the dynamics at play. Amanda was beautiful in the way that only very young women can be: luminous skin, bright eyes, and an air of excitement about her future that made me remember my own wedding day. 8 years earlier, she'd chosen a classic Align gown that suggested traditional values and romantic ideals. Marcus looked handsome in his tuxedo, but I noticed the subtle signs of stress, the tightness around his eyes, the forced quality of his smile, the way he kept glancing at his new father-in-law as if seeking approval. This was a man who'd learned to perform happiness rather than feel it. Sarah. Amanda practically ran to greet me during the cocktail hour, her enthusiasm genuine and touching. I'm so glad you came. Marcus wasn't sure you would. I wouldn't have missed it, I replied honestly. You look absolutely radiant. Thank you. I have to tell you, I've heard so many wonderful things about you. Marcus says you were incredibly supportive during his law school years. The rewriting of history was typical Marcus. He transformed my sacrifices into general support, my specific contributions into vague encouragement. But what struck me was Amanda's eagerness to connect with me, to build bridges rather than walls. How did you two meet? I asked. At a charity auction for the Children's Hospital. Marcus was there representing his law firm, and I was there with Daddy. We got into this amazing conversation about art and literature, and I just felt like he understood me in a way that boys my age never have. The calculated nature of Marcus's approach was obvious to me. At a charity event where he knew wealthy families would be present, a young woman accompanying her successful father. Intellectual conversation designed to make her feel sophisticated and valued. It was textbook emotional manipulation, but Amanda saw it as romantic connection. He's been through some difficult times recently, she continued, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. His divorce, some career challenges, family issues with his mother's estate. But I think everyone deserves a second chance at happiness, don't you? The family issues with his mother's estate was a masterful euphemism for losing $8 million to the ex-wife he treated poorly. Marcus had clearly presented himself as a victim of circumstances, rather than the architect of his own downfall. I hope you both find happiness, I said sincerely. During the ceremony, I watched Amanda's face as she recited her vows. Her love was genuine, her commitment absolute, her faith in their future unshakable. She had no idea that Marcus's vows were being delivered to her father's bank account as much as to her heart. The reception provided more insight into Marcus's strategy. He spent considerable time charming Amanda's father, discussing business opportunities and expressing interest in joining the family firm. The older man seemed pleased with his daughter's choice, seeing Marcus as a stable, sophisticated partner for his sometimes impulsive child. Quite a transformation. A voice said beside me as I observed the family dynamics from across the dance floor. I turned to find Richard Harrison, the managing partner from Marcus's former firm, holding a glass of champagne and studying the newlyweds. With professional interest, "Mr. Harrison, I didn't expect to see you here. Amanda's father and I serve on the hospital board together. He's quite proud of his new son-in-law." His tone carried subtle irony. Marcus seems to have landed on his feet remarkably quickly. "Yes, he has. I heard you've been quite successful with your real estate ventures, making quite a name for yourself. In the business community, I've been fortunate and clearly very intelligent. Your portfolio decisions show real strategic thinking." We talked for 20 minutes about market trends and investment opportunities, and I realized that Richard Harrison was evaluating me the same way. Eleanor had looking beyond surface impressions to assess character and capability, he said as the conversation wound down. "We're always looking for smart investors who understand the local market. If you ever decide you want to get more involved in business ventures, give me a call." As the evening progressed, I found myself in a fascinating position, watching my ex-husband marry a young woman who reminded me of my younger self, while being courted professionally by the man who'd once fired him for financial instability. The final moment of the evening came when Amanda approached me as I was preparing to leave. "Sarah, could I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "How do you know when someone truly loves you versus just needing you?" The question was so perceptive, so precisely targeted to the heart of what Marcus offered women, that I wondered if she wasn't as naive as she appeared. "That's a very wise question, Amanda. Marcus talks about me a lot in terms of what I bring to his life: stability, support, connections through daddy's business. But sometimes I wonder if he sees me as Sarah, the person, or Sarah, the solution. To his problems, I was Sarah, she was Amanda. But the parallel was exact, and her intuition was functioning despite her youth and inexperience. What does your heart tell you?" "My heart tells me that love should make you feel more like yourself, not less, and lately, I've been feeling like I need to be less enthusiastic, less opinionated, less me in order to be the wife Marcus needs." The wisdom in her words took my breath away. At 23, Amanda Sinclair was already recognizing patterns that had taken me years to identify. "Trust your heart," I told her, "and remember that you deserve to be loved for exactly who you are, not for who someone wants to shape you into." As I drove home that night, I realized that Eleanor's final lesson was still unfolding. She hadn't just taught me about my own worth, she'd shown me how to recognize and value authenticity in others. Amanda possessed something that couldn't be inherited or purchased: the clarity to ask the right questions before it was too late. Whether she would act on that clarity remained to be seen. But for the first time since receiving Eleanor's fortune, I understood that the greatest gift wasn't money. It was the confidence to trust my own judgment about people and situations. Marcus had found another woman to support his ambitions, another father-in-law to provide financial stability, another chance to avoid taking responsibility for his own failures. But he hadn't found love, because he was incapable of offering the vulnerability and genuine appreciation that love required. I drove through Portland's quiet streets toward the mansion that had become my sanctuary, no longer wondering what might have been if Marcus had valued our marriage instead. I was grateful that his inability to appreciate what he had freed me to discover what I deserved. 2 years after Marcus's wedding to Amanda, I received a phone call that brought Eleanor's story full circle. The caller was Amanda herself, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of resignation. I recognized all too well. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the university alumni directory. I need to ask you something, and I think you're the only person who can answer honestly." I set down the quarterly financial reports I'd been reviewing in my home office. Eleanor's former study had become the command center for my growing business empire, and gave Amanda my full attention. "How did you know it was time to leave?" The question hung between us like a bridge connecting to women who'd loved the same man and discovered his limitations in eerily similar ways. "What's happened, Amanda?" "Nothing dramatic, nothing I could point to as abuse or cruelty, just a gradual erosion of who I am." Her voice carried the weight of recognition that comes when you finally admit truths you've been avoiding. "He doesn't like my friends, they're too immature. He doesn't like my career interests, art history isn't practical enough. He doesn't like my family's social events, they're too flashy for his taste." The pattern was achingly familiar. Marcus's method of control wasn't aggressive. It was erosive, like water wearing away stone until nothing remained of the original foundation. How long has this been going on? Since about 6 months after the wedding. It started small suggestions about how I could improve myself, advice about being more sophisticated, guidance about fitting into his professional circle. I told myself he was helping me mature. And now I feel like I'm disappearing. I wake up every morning trying to remember who I was before I became Marcus's wife. And I can barely find her anymore. I looked around Eleanor's study at the portrait of my mother-in-law that hung above the fireplace, even now, 2 years after inheriting her fortune. I sometimes caught myself seeking her approval for major decisions. But I learned to recognize the difference between considering wise counsel and losing myself in someone else's expectations. Amanda, are you asking me for permission to leave your marriage? I'm asking you if it gets better. If there's a way to make him see me as an equal partner instead of a project to be improved. The hope in her voice broke my heart because I remembered harboring that same desperate optimism. For years, I believed that if I just tried harder, sacrificed more, became more perfect, Marcus would eventually appreciate my worth. In my experience, people don't fundamentally change their capacity for respect. They might modify their behavior temporarily, but their core beliefs about your value remain constant. He says I'm too sensitive, that I take things too personally. Do you believe that? I used to. Now I think maybe I'm not sensitive enough. Maybe I should have paid attention to these patterns sooner. The conversation continued for an hour, and by the end, I understood that Amanda was facing the same choice I'd confronted 2 years earlier. Accept diminishment or choose independence. There's something else, she said as our call neared its end. Daddy's been asking questions about Marcus's handling of some business matters. Nothing illegal, just questionable judgment calls that have cost the company money. The inevitable implosion was beginning. Marcus's pattern of poor decision-making, masked by charm and external support, would eventually catch up with him in professional settings just as it had in personal ones. What will you do? I'm going to see a lawyer next week, quietly, just to understand my options. She paused and I could hear her gathering courage. Sarah, can I ask you something else? Of course. Do you ever regret how everything ended? Do you ever wonder if you could have saved your marriage if you'd fought harder? I considered her question carefully, thinking about the woman I'd been during my marriage versus the woman I'd become since leaving it. Amanda, the most important thing I learned is that you cannot save a marriage by losing yourself in it. I spent 8 years trying to be worthy of Marcus's love, and the harder I tried, the less he valued me. It wasn't until I stopped seeking his approval that I discovered my own worth. Are you happy now? I looked around my office at the evidence of everything I'd built into short years. The real estate portfolio that had tripled Eleanor's initial investment, the scholarship programs that had helped dozens of women pursue their educations, the business relationships I cultivated with Portland's most respected leaders. More importantly, I thought about the peace I felt waking up each morning, the confidence I'd gained in my own judgment, the relationships I'd built with people who valued my opinions and respected my contributions. I'm happier than I knew was possible, not because of the money, though financial independence certainly helps. I'm happy because I finally know my own worth, and I refuse to accept less than I deserve from anyone. 6 months later, the Portland Tribune ran another society page announcement: Sinclair Cross marriage ends amicably. The article mentioned Amanda's plans to pursue graduate studies in museum administration, and Marcus's transition to a new position with a smaller firm outside Portland. I smiled reading the euphemistic language that covered what I knew had been a more dramatic reality. Through mutual friends, I'd heard that Amanda's father had discovered Marcus's mismanagement of several client accounts, that the marriage had ended when Amanda refused to serve as a shield against professional consequences, and that Marcus was leaving Portland to escape the professional reputation that had finally caught up with him. Amanda called me the week her divorce was finalized. I wanted to thank you, she said, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it, for showing me that it was possible to choose myself. You chose yourself, Amanda. I just confirmed what you already knew. I've been accepted to the graduate program at Columbia, museum studies with a focus on women's art history. It feels like coming back to life. Eleanor would have approved of Amanda's choice, I thought. She'd always valued women who possessed the strength to prioritize their authentic selves over social expectations. That evening, I opened Eleanor's journal to read one of my favorite entries. Written during the 2nd year of my marriage: strength is not about enduring mistreatment gracefully. True strength is about knowing your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve. Sarah is learning this lesson slowly, but she is learning it. When she finally understands her own value, nothing will be able to diminish her again. The phone rang, interrupting my reflection.